video with me talking on YouTube was really popular. So I knew that we were going to have to do another one where we talk about your life this time, because last time we talked about so many things, and we talked about my background, my early life, the struggles that you had with me, with my childhood illnesses, and the men in your life being absent, and then the trouble that you had with my birth, your pregnancy with me. So now I think, because everybody responded really well to that discussion that we had, if we now go over your life and talk about what made you who you are today, I think that would be a really good thing to do. So Let's go back then to, you were born in where?
I was born in Walthamstow, in Thorpe Combe Hospital.
And had your family always been in Walthamstow, London?
Not always, no. I think my grandmother had been there most of her life.
Yeah.
But my parents met somewhere else, but I think it was Lambeth.
Okay, so basically your most recent family up to your birth had been in London, London-based.
Yes.
Okay, so you were born in London, and then the next significant thing happened was the war, because you were 3 in 1939.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the war, as the war began, you didn't stay in London.
No, we didn't. I was happy in London. That was a very happy time of my life up to when I was 3. I was very free, able to run in the streets. There weren't many cars about. We lived near a river. I was happy to go and play, and I was left alone to do that.
So at 3, you were able to go out in the street and play with other children?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, I don't really remember other children. I just remember playing on my own. There was a school next door to where we lived, and my brother was in the school. He was 4 years older than me, and I used to go and peer through the railings at him, and I used to wait for playtime, and he would come out and ignored me, of course. He was 4 years older than me, but I used to like to watch him in the playground.
Yeah.
And just did my own thing.
Yeah. Okay. So then you had to go to Wales because the war had started and London was at risk because of the bombs. So there was an evacuation programme and you were evacuated. Why did you go to Wales?
Well, my father was Welsh, but we didn't go to Wales to start with. We went somewhere else, and I don't remember where that was. I just have vague memories of being somewhere else, on a farm somewhere, and walking 6 miles to the shops with my mother and my brother. But obviously they must have talked about it, and my father said that he would like to go back to Wales and stay with his father. So we all went back, and I wished we hadn't, but we did.
Why do you wish you hadn't?
It wasn't a happy time at all. The Welsh people resented us.
Yeah.
We were evacuees, and there were other evacuees, and my brother had very unhappy times at school. He was made to stand up and thanked everybody for having him. And then when he told my mother, she was angry, and she said, how would they like to have been bombed out of their house? No, there was a lot of unpleasantness, and it wasn't a happy time.
I think, though, that that's quite a common experience if you move from one town to another, one region to another. Maybe it's across the world, but in the UK, like when we moved to Yorkshire, there was a challenge there because they felt that we were Southerners coming to steal their jobs, and it was the 80s and a very depressive time. So I think that
Nobody can share, can they? Nobody wants to share with anybody. I mean, we're all human and we're all on the same planet, but it's like as if you're different because you live in a different place, and we're not making room for you because you're a foreigner to us.
Yeah, and I think it's the outsider thing. So everybody feels that they're in the gang, and then if somebody from the outside comes in, the gang feels stronger together because there's an outside entity. And so we had that when we went to Yorkshire.
I know, that was awful. I mean, that was even the parents.
Yeah.
And even when we came to Suffolk, somebody said, well, you know, with Heidi, you can't expect her to fit in because these children have been here for ages. And I said, are you telling me that they haven't got enough love in their characters to accept a stranger?
Yeah.
You know, Heidi was on her own. She was looking for friends. And the mothers were saying, well, you can't expect them to want to be friends with her.
Was that Heidi or me?
That was Heidi.
Oh.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite common. Wherever you go, that was Suffolk. And I love Suffolk.
Yeah.
And I love the Suffolk people, but
Yeah.
I didn't love that.
So basically then, whenever you're different in a new culture, there are going to be the majority of, well, it's not all the people, but a lot of the people find you different.
A certain element of people.
And they dominate.
Yes, they
because they're the
seem
loudest.
to resent somebody's taking something that they could have had.
Yeah.
In whatever capacity.
And it might be a fear response because
Could be.
you're taking our resources.
Yes.
Okay, so that's interesting because that would have formed how you...
And perhaps we're beginning to feel like that about the foreigners that are coming to England. You know, they're taking something that it should be ours. But nothing should be ours.
Well,
you know?
I think there are different arguments with the migration issue because some of that is forced and on purpose. And they're not being integrated. They're just being dumped into towns and cities without requiring them to understand the culture, or we don't have enough resources to share out suddenly all these people. But what we're referring to is a situation that you were in and I was in as well. So we had a similar childhood experience in that you went to this new culture, Wales, from London. So for them, that would have been like you're from another universe. You're from hours and hours. It would have been a long drive in those days to get to London. So it's like you're from another country being deposited in Wales. So they're thinking that you're immigrants. So you became immigrants. And then later we did the same thing when we went to Yorkshire. We were the immigrants in Yorkshire and we were treated as the outsiders again, which is a very interesting and positive. In the end, it becomes a positive experience, but at the time, it's a struggle to live. So going back to you in Wales then, so you were 3, you'd moved to Wales, and other than the struggle with the community not accepting you Londoners, do you remember the life experience there? Was it happy?
I looking back now, I enjoyed that I went because I wouldn't have met my grandfather. I might have seen him once or twice if he bothered to come and visit us in London, which he did. But I wouldn't have had the relationship with him, and I loved him. You know, he was a strange man, kept himself a lot to himself, giggled a lot, found things funny. And yeah, I did. I loved him. I don't know whether he loved me. I think we were probably a nuisance.
Yeah.
Suddenly falling on him, you know, where he'd been alone and probably enjoying it.
Yeah.
Because he'd had a big family. And then my father was very fond of his dad and he wanted to go back to Wales. But the place was very... Well, I mean, we weren't rich anyway, so we weren't used to luxuries, but that place was beyond anything that we'd ever seen before. It was really rough and not very nice at all. And I remember the first memory I have of my mother pulling the covers off the bed and dragging them down the stairs and chucking them out into the garden because the place had bugs.
Oh.
And the bugs were in the bed. And my mother said she would rather have faced the bombs
than the bugs.
Than have gone to that place, yeah.
And did she deal with the bugs?
Well, we did our best. I mean, well, Mum did her best. I mean, she applied to the council to fumigate the place, and they said that there was no point in fumigating the place because the place was built with stuff that had bugs in it, which sounds a bit bizarre when you look back. But the war was on, and I don't think they could be bothered.
Okay.
And of course, children attract bugs because you've got young blood, and that's what they want. You know, so suddenly, I mean, my grandfather probably never got any bugs in his bedroom, you know, because he was an old man. But when the children came in, you know, they probably licking their lips.
Yummy, yummy.
And one of them was a baby. My brother was only a few months old. So, yeah, that was pretty... I mean, as a child facing that, I mean, I was barely aware that the bugs were around. But if I was an adult now, I couldn't cope with it.
So did you have bed bug bites?
Oh, we recovered.
Oh.
Actually, Mum said they were heat bumps because she didn't want to say your body had stuff crawling over you all night. Because as a child, I would have been horrified. I would never have gone to bed again.
Yeah.
But she said, "Oh, look, it's the heat bumps."
Right.
And I used to have to go to the clinic and have stuff rubbed on my body. Because I was covered.
Gentian violet and...
I have no idea
like
what
that?
it was. I was too young to know.
Okay, so you escaped war in London and invaders and attackers, and you went to bed bugs in Wales.
And we had to fight them. Yeah, they were worse than, well, not worse than the bombs, obviously, but certainly mentally worse than the bombs, because we found it quite exciting, diving down a shelter.
Yeah.
You know.
With an air raid siren.
With an air raid siren going, "Mum, Germans are coming." And my mother's racing around grabbing bits and racing us down to the shelter. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was quite fun.
So did you have a shelter in the garden in London?
No, we didn't. We lived above an electrical shop, and we had the back rooms, and it was a flat. And the guy just sold his electrical stuff in the front of the shop, and we had upstairs and the back room and a bit of a yard. And yeah, it was great. And then there were a couple of 3 houses, and then the school. So we had to use next door's air raid shelter, and she said, "Yes, of course, you must knock on the door when there's an air raid, and I'll leave the door open and you come down into the shelter." And we joined her in the shelter, which was very nice of her. But I mean, you don't turn around to somebody and say, "You might get killed, but you're not coming into my shelter." There's a limit to... Yeah. So she was living alone, so there was room in the shelter.
So you ended up escaping all of that by going to Wales, and there were no bombs being dropped in Wales.
I think there was a bomb. I think the Germans were on their way back from a raid, and one of the planes had a bomb over.
Yeah, and they offloaded.
And he saw a light up on the hill, because there were farms up on the hills, and he dropped his bomb. Yeah. So that was quite exciting.
So this is the childhood experience of war. Yeah. Everything was exciting.
It's exciting. Yeah, if they'd landed, it wouldn't have been exciting. But yeah, we went to the pictures twice a week, and we saw all the war and, the soldiers. And
Pathé News.
Yeah. And I couldn't wait for Mickey Mouse. Yeah. I wish they wouldn't keep putting this boring news stuff on. Yeah. But, I was very proud of our soldiers. They'd see to it. I didn't have to worry.
Yeah. Yeah. So your grandfather's house, it was a very basic house.
It was one in a block, no front garden. It went straight onto the street. It had a nice area out the back, a garden. And the toilet was down the bottom of the garden. There were no toilet rolls that I know of in the war, unless my parents were too poor to buy them, so it was newspaper. Yeah. So, pretty basic. No, not even cut up. My mother didn't bother with the cutting up.
So did you
She had a new baby. No, she had a new baby, so she'd just gone... I'd say, "Mum, there's no toilet paper in the toilet," so she'd bring the newspaper down and chuck it in. Oh. And you just sort of use it according to what you...
Just read a bit while you're just negotiating.
It wasn't very comfortable, I do remember that.
Yeah, did you get quite inky?
Probably, but who knows? I mean, you can't sort of put your eyeballs round the back, can you, and have a look?
No. And then you washed once a week.
We washed every day.
Oh,
but we bathed once a week.
Okay.
Yeah, and changed your clothes once a week.
In a tin bath?
Yes.
And changed your clothes once a
week. Mum did the washing on Monday, and gradually they dried and was prepared for the weekend when you had your bath.
So your clothes must have been standing up by themselves by the end of
Well,
the week.
in those days, you didn't think about things like that.
Yeah.
You know, it was you changed your clothes once a week.
And everybody did it.
Everybody did it.
Nobody thought anything
Nobody had many clothes. Clothes were on ration.
Yeah.
And you used them until they wore out.
Yeah.
You know, so underclothes were the last things that you would get new of.
Yeah.
You just kept going until the elastic fell out of the legs and they were dangling round by your knees.
Yeah.
You know, and Mum put the baby in them as rompers. You know, once your knickers were pulled out of shape and the legs were hanging down,
Yeah.
the baby crawled around in them.
Right.
So then you might, you know, at some point you might get a new pair, but it was generally you'd get a jumper.
Yeah.
Or a skirt or something like that. We didn't get trousers. Nobody had jeans or, you know, if anybody had trousers, they were rich.
Yeah.
There wasn't much of anything about.
And your basic facilities, so you didn't have a bathroom, you had a tin bath in front of the fire, and you had a kitchen sink, no washing machine,
No cooker.
no cooker.
We didn't have a kitchen sink. We had a tap that came out of the wall dripping into a bucket.
So how did you cook?
My mother cooked on the open fire. And there was nothing in some, when people cooked on open fires years ago, they had a skillet that bent round. My mother didn't have that. She just had to settle. If we had tea, then the kettle had to be settled in with the coke or whatever we were burning. And my grandfather, gradually to light his fire, had torn up the lino. At some time there'd been lino on the floor when my grandmother was alive, but she died very early. She died at 42. So my grandfather had been on his own a long time. And he just tore a lump off the lino to light his fire. So when we got there, they were just paving stones. And my mother is trying to scrub the paving stones, and the dirt in between the paving stones is smearing all over the... So she didn't have a good life.
Yeah.
And that was just how we lived.
And so your father, who was Welsh then, so his father was Welsh and owned this house, and
He didn't own it.
Oh, he rented.
Yes, it was one of a row.
Okay. Are they like workers' houses?
I think
For the mine?
they were built for the miners.
Okay. Because he was a miner.
No, he wasn't. My grandfather, he was one of the youngest. He had a younger brother, but my grandfather didn't want. His older brother didn't want him to go down the mine.
Your grandfather's older brother?
No, my father's older brother didn't want the younger ones to go down the mine. So he said, you can stay at home and you can do the cooking.
So he did the cooking.
So my father was happy to stay at home, and he never went down the mines.
Right, okay.
But when he had a at some point he went to London to work in a hotel because they said the benefit system, such as it was in those days, said that if anybody could work, they had to work. So if there was no work in the valley, there's work in London.
Yeah.
So you have to come and do it. And we're not going to pay you. If you choose not to go, then starve virtually. So he went to London. His brother, one of his brothers went to work in one of the hotels, but he couldn't cope with it. He was used to the Wales and the way of life. And he missed his friends and he went back. But my father went and he stayed there and met my mother.
Was this Claridge's?
Yes, he was working at Claridge's and he was an underporter or something, and my mother's sister was working at Claridge's, and my granny, I mean they were quite hard in those days, my granny took my mother to London. No, she didn't. She took her to some seaside resort. I can't remember where it is now, but I will
Margate?
Margate. Took her to Margate for the day, and they had a nice time. And she had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. And then at the end of the day, my granny got on the coach with the younger ones and said to my mother, "You're not coming, find a job."
Oh my gosh.
So she's standing there crying her eyes out, watching the coach go with her mother and her family on it.
How old was she?
Well, I suppose she had been 14. But in those days, I mean, I don't know what 40-year-olds are like nowadays, but in those days, they were never left anywhere on their own, never went on a bus on their own.
Yeah.
You know, it was pretty sort of protected environment. So my mother was floundering, and then she remembered that her sister worked in Margate. So she went round all the hotels looking for her sister. And her sister got her a job in Margate. She got her a job in the hotel.
Is Margate London?
I don't actually know where Margate is.
Okay, I can check.
And eventually my mother left the hotel and she got a job in a private house. And she was very happy there. And she worked for this lady and, lived there, sort of bed and board. And she sent 4pence halfpenny to her mother. Or, no, what was it? She was given 4pence halfpenny of the wage. I can't remember. I'm a bit confused about that. But I know that she had to send some of that to her mother. Which she did. And then at some point, she left Margate and ended up in the I don't know if she followed her sister, but they went to Claridge's, and that was where she met my father.
And he was blonde-haired, blue eyes.
Very good looking. My mother married a good looking man, and unfortunately that was all she got.
Because he'd been reared by his dad and his older brothers.
He was a baby in his mind. He'd been nursemaided.
Because his mother had died when he was about 10. So he ended up with this, was it 7 boys or something like?
She had two little girls that died very young and 8 boys.
So he was one of 8 boys and they kind of reared themselves because she died early.
More or less.
And so he...
He was 8 years old when she died.
Okay.
Old enough to know what it was to have a mother and then to lose her.
Yeah.
And the next one down was 6. And that was Jessie.
Okay.
And all the others were older. A very sad life, really, because Reginald, a brother that was a bit old, 2 years older than him, something happened to him as a child. He was climbing a fence and he fell. And it was a spiky fence and the spike pierced him. And he sort of recovered, but only sort of. He was always weak after that and he didn't live long. I think he was 21 when he died.
Okay.
So, it was very sad. Another baby, George, I think that was the first one, died young. So all that was left when I came on the scene was my dad, Jessie and Arthur.
Oh, wow.
And Arthur was the older brother that wouldn't let my dad go down the mines. And at that time Arthur was in the army because the war was on.
Did he survive?
Yes, he did. Arthur lived until he was about 70 something.
Okay.
So he had a reasonable long life.
Okay. So you came into this environment where they had all been living and lived out their lives in this tiny house with no plumbing and no bathroom and bed bugs.
Yeah.
And so...
I mean, the thing is, when they're old, it's possible they never saw any bed bugs.
Yeah.
Because they go after youngsters, so they'd have been next door.
Yeah.
It's when you bring a baby into the house that the bugs turn up.
Yeah. And in this tiny house, there was another family living, sleeping.
Well, during the war, they just told you if you had spare bedrooms, there's somebody that's going to need it because there's a war on.
Mm-hmm.
And this family, called the Willistons, had a mother that lived round the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have room in their house, it was full. So they told my grandfather that there was a family that needed
Mm-hmm.
somewhere to sleep at night.
Yeah.
So my grandfather was in the back bedroom. That was the biggest bedroom, obviously. I mean, he'd been there on his own, he chose the biggest bedroom. And the next biggest bedroom, the Williston family was there. That was a mum and dad and Glenys, their little girl.
Mm.
So when we got there, mum and dad with 3 children,
Wow.
all that was left was a little box room.
Mm.
So we all squashed into that.
No bunk beds.
Well, Dennis wouldn't sleep in the cot. So there was my brother Ernie and mum and dad and the baby in the bed.
Mm.
And mum said, you'll have to sleep in the cot. Well, the cot wasn't very big. And as I mean, when we left Wales, I was 10.
And you were still sleeping
I was
in the
still
cot?
in the cot. So there was nowhere for my legs. So I'm surprised I grew, really, because I had to sleep screwed up in a ball.
Wow. Wow.
And that was our life.
So, do you remember Wales? Do you remember, did
yeah.
it become a happy place?
It didn't really, no. At the weekends we always went out for a long walk and we went up on the hills and I enjoyed that.
Mm.
And there was sheep and it was like a paradise. You know, you come, it's like heaven and hell.
Mm.
You know, you go up into heaven.
Yeah.
There's trees.
Yeah.
You know, there's grass, there's sheep, it's quiet. There are farms.
Yeah.
And they've got fruit trees. And then you come down into hell. And that's concrete and
the valley.
the valley.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's where the mine was at one end.
Yeah.
And then the steelworks
at the other end. Mum used to put her washing out on the line and bring it in, she said, dirtier than when she put it out.
My goodness. But that was the employment for the time. So although that was seen as barren and concrete, that's what brought people's income in, because you had the mine and the steelworks where people would go for work.
Yeah.
And did you say that each morning you would hear them coming back from their shift?
You would hear hundreds of hobnail boots on the road.
Yeah.
And it was like, you could imagine the Germans marching.
Yeah.
And that's what we heard. And it was all the miners going to work. And then you'd hear the other shift coming back. And that was every morning.
Mm-hmm. Did they sing?
They didn't. It was quiet. Well, it was very early in the morning.
Okay.
So if they had, I think there would have been some complaints.
Yeah.
But you'd hear shook, 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 shook.
Were they
all in rhythm.
Were they known for their singing?
Yeah, we would hear them singing in the chapel
Okay.
on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And I think they went to the chapel, not because they were religious, but because they could hear their lungs.
Oh.
And it sounded wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you go to chapel? Your
We
family?
did. There was the mission hall over the road and we went over there
Yeah.
and I learnt a song, Jesus Bids Us Shine.
Yeah.
But I thought it was Jesus Bids Us Shine.
Okay, yeah.
So I sang all the wrong words, but I thought I was singing it right.
Yeah.
And Jesus bids us shine with a pure, pure light.
Yeah.
Like a little candle burning in the night.
He looks down from heaven for to see us shine.
Ah.
You in your small corner and I in mine.
That's right. And we sang that every week.
Yeah. And then you taught it to me.
I did.
You taught me many songs. And maybe I
don't
learned
remember any others.
Maybe I learned all the wrong words then.
Well, no, you wouldn't have done by then. I think I'd have sussed out that it wasn't bits of shine.
Yeah, yeah.
So you sort of, you know, when a little bit of intelligence starts to mature, you realise that you've been doing it wrong.
Okay. So, were your parents religious? Did they have any belief system?
My mother was religious, not heavily so, but she believed in God and she believed in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but I don't think she ever took it to an extreme.
And what about your dad?
I don't know about Dad. He never talked about it.
Okay, so you're in this house, living your life in Wales, and you remember the mountains, and you remember, was it the...
Well, I called them mountains because they looked like mountains to me, but they were hills.
Okay.
They say we'll keep a welcome in the hillside. They never did, but the song is...
You weren't welcome.
We'll keep a welcome in the hillside.
Yeah.
We'll keep a welcome in the dales. So they know the hills as hills.
Yeah.
But yes, we called them mountains because that's what they look like to us.
And do you remember the weather? It was always raining. Did you have any...
It was always raining.
Oh.
And I realise now that it was raining because of the hills.
Yes.
But it was always raining.
Yeah.
I don't remember any sunny days, but there must have been some because we wouldn't have gone walking out. But I tell you one happy memory, it was picking wimberries.
Okay.
And on one of the hills, down Averbeeg Road, you'd climb up and you would take your jar and fill it with wimberries, and they were delicious. You know, you don't get them anywhere else.
Yeah. And you would just eat them from the jar?
No, you'd come home and you'd make a pie.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. And they were tiny. They're like blackcurrants, but tinier.
Yeah.
But they've got a taste all their own. And once you've tasted wimberries, you will never forget.
I wonder what they are now. Are they still called wimberries? Because I've never heard that. So they must have been called... Are they like blueberries?
I haven't seen anything... No, they're not blueberries. Blueberries taste different and they're bigger.
Okay.
But wimberries, I've only ever found them in Wales. And when we went back for one of the funerals, we went back when I was in my 20s, and we had wimberry pie.
Must just be a Welsh thing then.
I think it must be. And of course, now they've changed it, or probably done away with a lot of that land. The wimberries would have gone.
Yeah. Okay.
So they may not even exist anymore.
Okay, so you got to age 9 by the end of the war, and then you had to go back to London.
I had my 9th birthday in Wales. I remember that because I got the cards from London from my grandmother, which I've still got. And I had my 10th birthday in Leighton in London. We moved in with my auntie. She had, that was my mother's younger sister. She had a big old house. She rented it, but it had rooms to spare. So my mother made a kitchen on the 2nd level. So we had a big bedroom on the 2nd level next to the kitchen. And we had 2 or 3 bedrooms upstairs.
So that must have felt palatial after
It did,
Wales.
yeah.
And then, so integrating into the culture in London, did you find that was easy? Because you must have had Welsh accents, the Welsh culture by then. You must have basically been Welsh going to London.
I think people will, you don't realise it yourself. You know, I heard the kids talking and I knew they sounded different. But I wasn't aware that I had a Welsh accent. But I did. And people used to comment on it. And that's when I knew that I had an accent.
Yeah.
And doesn't that sound nice, they would say.
Yeah.
But it didn't last long.
Yeah.
Because the kids were Cockney.
Yeah. So you went from talking like that, and then you ended up talking like that.
Yeah. And my mother, and I go, yeah. And my mother said, whatever's happened to the way you used to talk, and you talk now, and it's horrible. And yeah. And I used to get told off.
And did you find that people were happy with you coming back from Wales into their community? Was there a different issue coming back?
I don't really remember that. No, we came back and we were Londoners and we'd come back to our home, really.
Yeah.
So I don't remember anybody, because a lot of different people came back.
Yeah,
so
I
they
suppose.
couldn't take on everybody.
And London became multicultural anyway, because there were Americans, there were different nationalities.
I don't really remember a lot of different nationalities. They were all Londoners.
by then, because that was the end of the war, so most people would have
gone back.
But anyone that lived in London through that, unless they were evacuated, they would have experienced various nationalities coming into London.
I'm sure they would, but we weren't there.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have had a cultural problem with integrating. You would have just gone back to London and be like, you're a new set of people, like all the other new sets of people coming back. So, having gone back to London, were you happy to be back? Was it a good experience?
Yes, very.
And then you...
Very happy to be back. My mother wasn't happy in Wales.
Mm.
And I knew that. Even as a child, I knew that.
Mm.
She hated it. My father, I think he would have preferred to have stayed in Wales. That was his home. And in later life, now, as I am now, I'm very resentful that my father took us there. Because he wanted to be with his father. And I'd say he wanted to be with Daddy. He wasn't thinking of his kids. He knew that place was full of bugs. And he took 3 kids into that. And one of them, a new baby. He must have known what it was like and how we would live. He knew that my mother would have to cook on a fire. He knew that she didn't have a bathroom and she didn't have a toilet. And not even a sink in the back area, just a tap.
Yeah.
And the first memory I have of turning up there on that first day was my mother dragging this material from the bed down the stairs and chucking it out, and she was going, "Oh my goodness!" And I remember that as she chucked it out because it was full of bugs. And my father, there was a bucket under this tap, and there was a cloth there, a dirty, wet cloth to catch the drips. And my father dragged it out. It was full of worms.
Where did the worms come from?
I don't know, but they looked like earthworms.
Oh.
So I don't know what they were doing there or why they were there.
Okay.
And there was a larder that was meant for food, but my mother never used it because they were full of mice.
Oh.
So I don't know how she managed. I would have gone straight back to London.
Yeah. And just lived.
I would have seen the bugs and I would have said, "Stop right there. Don't even unpack. We're out of here."
Yeah. Perhaps she didn't have money to get back.
Maybe not.
Wow.
But my mother put up with a lot. And my father, he got a job away. He was away all week. So she was left with that on her own.
No. So
I remember her in the morning, just excuse me for a minute, because the toilet was down the garden, so we had a jerry pot for a pee in the night if one of the kids needed a pee. So she's got this jerry pot and she's knocking the bugs into the pot to kill as many as she could. And there she is, and Ernie remembered that.
Your brother.
He said, yeah, and he said, "Do you remember Mum knocking the bug?" Because as you stir, they race off because, oops, we better disappear.
Yeah.
So they're intelligent. They're racing up the wall, and she was trying to get as many into this pot as she could because it meant less was going to be feeding on her kids that night. I couldn't live like that.
And they didn't have hoovers, so you couldn't hoover them up.
No, everything was a little dustpan. And
did you have lights?
We did. Oh no, candles. We didn't have any electricity upstairs, and we had no light switches. So when we came in after dark, Dad or Mum or whoever was there had to reach up and turn the light on the ceiling.
Oh yeah.
So there were no light switches.
Was that gas? Gas?
No, it was electricity.
Okay.
I don't think we had any gas.
Okay.
I don't think there was gas in the valley. So, but upstairs it was a candle.
Yeah. They were really hard times.
They were terrible times.
That was like...
I don't know how they managed.
Medieval.
Maybe Dad was used to it, but Mum wasn't used to it.
Yeah.
Mum came from a cosy cleaner with all the mod cons for those days. And suddenly, I would be very amazed if there's anybody on this planet that can say, "My life has been wonderful from start until it's going to finish.
Yeah.
Everything has gone right for me. I've been loved to bits by everybody that's ever crossed my path.
Yeah.
Never had to deal with anything. Always had plenty of money. Plenty of everything. I used to say when I was bringing up my numerous children, and they had everything that was going. They've had measles, chicken pox, everything. They've had worms, they've had nips, they've had fleas. And I used to say there is nothing that I haven't experienced. So if anybody says, I'm overwhelmed, my child has got this, I can tell them what to do and what to get.
Yeah.
Because I've been there and I've done it.
Yeah.
And that's quite valuable to have.
Yeah.
You know, I feel as if I face most things. And I can tell people what to do and what to get and how to cope with it.
Oh, cross that liftest up my head, I dare not ask to fly from thee. I lay in dust, life's glory dead, and from the ground there blossoms red life that shall endless be.
I made a mess up here somewhere.
That's all right. It carried off well.
Well, you did.